Chapter 6, Progression and Voice Leading with 1, 4, and 5. First, let's talk about chord functions. The primary chords, 1, 4, and 5, are the fundamental harmonic functions in tonal music. The 1 chord is called tonic, and it's the defining harmony of the key. It's usually the starting chord as well as the chord that you use to end the music or return to. You can kind of think of it like home base in the music when you're listening to a composition. The 4 chord, or the subdominant, is like an excursion away from home. It goes away from home. It might return back to the tonic, but it's also very likely that it might lead on to somewhere else. Here's the tonic chord. There's the 4 chord. It might go back to tonic, or it might go somewhere else. Sometimes it leads on to the dominant chord, and so because of this, and to put it in a functional category, we'll call that a dominant preparation chord. That's the 4 chord. Now the 5 chord, we call this dominant. It also represents an excursion away from tonic, and it's built a perfect fifth above tonic. It's got a special relationship to the tonic chord because of its relationship to the overtone series. It's actually the second overtone compared to tonic, and it just sort of resonates and makes sense that way. But it also has a certain instability because of its prominent tendency tone. So here's the 1 chord, and here's the 5 chord, the dominant chord. And there's the tendency tone, the leading tone, wants to go back to 1. Now, since that leading tone's only a half step away from tonic, it does want to return to tonic, and for this reason, the dominant's usually used as a chord that creates this tension and wants to progress back to tonic. So, the harmonic functions can be summarized like this. Here is the 1 chord. It's called tonic. It's home base. It progresses to any other chord. Here is the 4 chord. It's an excursion. It can either return back to tonic or progress to dominant. And here's the dominant chord. This one really, because of its leading tone, has a strong tendency to want to move on and go back to tonic. We have authentic, plagal, and half cadences. Now, a few definitions. A phrase is a musical sentence with a very distinct melodic shape. The end of the phrase can be perceived by some kind of a cessation of the forward motion. In other words, at some point, the phrase comes to a conclusion. Just like the sentence that I'm speaking right now is going to come to a conclusion by me slowing down and my pitch going down and coming to an ending and then a pause. Music does the same thing. Melodic and harmonic destinations can be perceived at the end of the phrase, and these are called cadences. So let's take a look at a chorale by J.S. Bach, and there are 2 phrases and with a cadence at the end of each one. So in these phrases, we can perceive the ends of the phrases, the cadences, because there's a cessation of the forward motion. In other words, the music seems to come to a stop in terms of moving forward. In those places, there is actually a fermata placed above the chord to tell the performer to stop and wait. In both cadences, the harmony consists of a very strong progression of the 5 chord, resolving to the 1 chord. When a 5 chord resolves to a 1 chord at the end of the phrase, we call this an authentic cadence. Here's the sound. Now note that there are some decorative pitches that are in parentheses at each cadence that don't seem to be part of the basic triad. The use of these pitches is really common, and we'll undertake a thorough study of them in later chapters. Now, the next example is a very simple arrangement of the Ode to Joy by Beethoven, a famous theme from the last movement of Beethoven's 9th Symphony. And in this excerpt, there are 2 clear 4-measure phrases. The cadences, remember that's the end of the phrase, they can be perceived because the longer half-note rhythm is seen and heard at the end of each phrase. Give it a listen. So the first cadence, that's in measure 4, is considered non-final because the 5 chord keeps us in anticipation of the second phrase. In fact, any cadence that does not end on a 1 chord is considered non-final. When a phrase ends specifically with a 5 chord, as it does in measure 5, it's called a half cadence. Listen again to that cadence and just hear that ending on the 5 chord is almost like leaving us with a question, like it needs to be answered with more music. We can't really end the music there. Give it a listen. So that's the half cadence. Listen to the second phrase now, which ends with a much more final sound by using the authentic cadence 5-1. And phrases that are paired in this manner with the first ending on a half cadence and the second ending with an authentic cadence, that's called an antecedent consequent, or a question and answer. Here's the second phrase. I hope you can hear that going from 5-1 at the end of that second phrase is a much more complete sound. It gives a feeling of completion. So we call it a final cadence. There's one more kind of cadence that we need to talk about. So far we've got the half cadence and we've got the authentic cadence. The final one's called the Plagal Cadence. And this one is most often seen in church music and church hymns. And you usually hear it at the end of the hymn after you've sung the whole hymn. Probably you've had an authentic cadence 5-1, as you're going to hear in a moment. And then the congregation gets to sing Amen at the end. And those 2 chords are the sound of a Plagal cadence. Give this a listen. So the Plagal cadence is the progression of 4 going to 1. And because it includes the 1 chord, we can say that it falls into the category of a final cadence. But it does not have the same kind of strength as an authentic cadence. In fact, it really is not in common usage as functioning independently in common practice music. And as you can see in the example I just played, the hymn really does seem to conclude with the strong authentic cadence 5-1 first. And then the Plagal cadence is used on the word Amen, almost as an afterthought. Now the cadences that we've seen up to this point can be summarized as follows. The authentic cadence, 5 going to 1. The Plagal cadence, 4 going to 1. And then we have the half cadence. That's when the music just goes to a 5 chord and stays on that chord. Now, one additional distinction that we want to make with final cadences is whether they are perfect or imperfect. A perfect cadence is one that would provide a strong and satisfactory effect at the conclusion of a composition. In order for a final cadence to be called perfect, both chords of the cadence have to be in root position, and the final pitch of the soprano must be in the tonic. And if either of these conditions are not met, the cadence is called imperfect. So here is an example of a perfect cadence in the key of E flat. Here's the 5 chord going to 1. Both chords are in root position. In other words, the first chord is a B flat D F chord, the 5 chord, going to a 1 chord, which is an E flat G B flat chord. The root is at the bottom, and also in the last chord, the root is at the top. So it is a perfect, authentic cadence. The next is a Plagal cadence. This one is also perfect. It's a 4 chord, A flat, C, E flat, in root position because the root is in the bass, moving to the 1 chord, E flat, G, B flat, in root position because the root's in the bass, and also the root is in the soprano. Both of those conditions have to be met, therefore this is a perfect cadence. You can go ahead and take a look at Check Your Understanding 6.1, and some of those are imperfect. Actually, these are all imperfect, and you want to ask yourself why. What's missing? Which condition is not being met there?